But athletes do dumbass things if it improves their performance.
Every once in a while, an athlete will come around with so much talent that the powers that be end up changing the rules. Sometimes the rules are changed to protect the safety of the spectators, or protect the safety of the athlete, and sometimes it's to protect the integrity of the sport. So in 1958, new rules were added to the high jump because athletes found a loophole to give themselves an advantage by wearing a shoe with an extra thick sole on their takeoff foot. Let's take recent events in mind. Eliud Kipchoge recently broke the 2-hour barrier in the marathon, and then Brigitte Kosgei shattered the marathon world record in Chicago, both while wearing shoes specifically designed to make them faster. Many people began referring to this as technology doping, as an homage to the PED doping that's plagued the sport for so many years. Because there's one thing we know for certain: athletes will always continue to try to find new ways to improve their performance. But the first time shoes played a role in improving athletic performance was actually back in the 1950s, and it was riddled with controversy and, unfortunately, eventually ended in tragedy. So what happened? Well, in the early days since high jump became a global event, the Americans have dominated the high jump field. They were basically untouchable, winning almost every major international tournament for 50 years. But then in 1957, something changed. 3 Soviet high jumpers burst onto the scene, each setting major improvements to their lifetime marks. Igor Kasparov jumped 2.14 meters, Vladimir Sitkin improved to 2.15 meters, and most notably was Yuri Stepanov, who on July 13, 1957, broke the high jump world record with a height of 2.16 meters, or 7 feet 1 inch, in Leningrad, and he became the first non-American to hold the title of world record holder. This was a pretty big deal. Stepanov was relatively unknown to the global jumping community, and it was quite an increase to his prior PR of 2.04 meters. As a matter of fact, the entire field of Soviet jumpers were improving. In 1955, Vladimir Sitkin became the first Soviet to clear the 2-meter mark, followed by Yuri Stepanov and Igor Kasparov. In 1957, the 2-meter barrier was done by 19 Soviet jumpers. Now, besides all the geopolitical events surrounding the Soviet Union and its expansion during this time, there are a few things that I must point out that the Soviet coaches were doing that likely contributed to this improvement. First, after the 1956 Olympics, all Soviet athletes added weightlifting to their training programs. Second, they increased the speed of their approach, which compared to many of the Western jumpers, where they would just jog up and then only accelerate on the last few steps. And third, in 1956, Yuri Stepanov and many others, they changed their jumping technique from the lateral roll to the ventral roll with a dive, which paired really well with the faster velocities in the run-up. So with these things in mind, if we look at Stepanov's yearly height progression, it's definitely a realistic natural improvement. So his world record jump in 1957 shouldn't really have been thought of as that much of a shock. But the rest of the world kind of came out of nowhere. Back then, that information just wasn't as easy to come by, so a few weeks after Stepanov's world record jump, the newspaper L'Equipe published an article with a close-up picture of his record jump, which appeared to show that the shoe on his takeoff foot had an unusually thick sole, likely around 2 centimeters. Then, a photo surfaced of his fellow Soviet jumper Igor Kasparov, and he had worn a similar shoe at the previous Olympics, and it appeared to be an even thicker sole, between 2 and 4 centimeters. Reports from 1957 claim that the shoe had a sole around 5 centimeters thick, or about 2 inches, and was made from a flexible and porous material that acted like a spring or a vertical trampoline. While the elevated shoe was definitely an advantage, in reality, its sole was just a pad of red rubber with inset spikes. And as it turns out, it wasn't entirely new either, as it had been used in other countries as well, but it just hadn't been used in major competitions. But it definitely made a difference. Swedish high jumper Bertil Holmgren stated that they improved performance by 4 inches. So as the controversy grew, the Soviets then tried to justify it by claiming that they're intended to reduce the risk of injury, while in reality, it was a legal gray area and there just weren't any rules against it. And because of that, in the 1957 season, the built-up shoe, which was being referred to as the Orthopedic Shoe or the Compensated Shoe, became the shoe of choice for almost all professional high jumpers, and their marks soared as a result. I mean, technically, a jumper could have worn a shoe with a 4-inch thick sole without violating the rules of the international athletics. Ernie Sheldon of the US even came up with a bear trap shoe to use in the 1957 Paris meet up against Stepanov in light of this built-up shoe scandal, track and field's world governing body IAAF, now World Athletics, initially declared Stefanos' mark invalid in January 1958, only a few months after his record-setting attempt. And then in May, they established rules for shoe design, limiting the sole thickness to half an inch or 1.27 millimeters. But in August, IAAF reversed their decision, reinstating Stefanov's world record because there was no rule at the time prohibiting sole thickness. Unfortunately, Stepanov's personal story didn't end well. The following year in 1958, he continued to compete at a high level, jumping in normal shoes 2.12 meters, which was his third highest clearance ever, and he won the USA-USR dual meet. But after receiving a lot of media attention and criticism and doubts about his record, he sunk into a depression and turned to alcoholism, which required hospitalization in 1959. Then following a divorce in 1961, took his own life in 1962 at the age of 31. This now leads me in a spot to quote Tariki Delmere. He said, "Athletes will do some dumbass things if they think it'll improve their performance. We all want to be the best, but sometimes we make bad decisions, or we receive bad guidance, or we do things with innocent intentions which turn out to have bad outcomes. Whatever the consequences, if this happens to you, learn from your mistakes, but don't let your mistakes define you." Now, if you enjoyed this video, I have a whole series on banned techniques in track and field that you can go check out. Thanks for watching.